Is he going to attack me right now? That is what you are thinking all night, sitting by the fire thousands of years ago. Should you hide? Should you defend yourself? What should you do? All because one person in the tribe begins to act strangely. He talks to those no one else can see. He hears voices in the dark. He walks away from the fire at night as if someone is calling him from behind the trees. Is he sick, or have the spirits chosen him? There are no doctors, no hospitals, no pills, no words like depression, psychosis, or mental illness. There is only a dark forest, a cold wind, and your small group of people trying to survive one more night. Today, we often think ancient people were simple and cruel. We imagine that if a person could not hunt, fight, gather food, or help the group, they were simply left behind. But ancient bones tell a very different story. They show us something strange, something uncomfortable, something surprisingly human. Ancient people did not always get rid of the weak. In many cases, they protected them, fed them, carried them, helped them stay alive. And when a person's mind seemed to break, ancient people often did something we do not expect. They gave that person meaning. They turned fear into a story. They turned strange behavior into a sign. And sometimes the person we would call mentally ill today became the one everyone listened to. Long before modern medicine, long before therapy, long before people understood how the brain works, ancient groups already had to live beside people whose minds worked differently. Because mental suffering is not new. It did not begin with phones. It did not begin with cities. It did not begin because of stress, work, money, or social media. As long as humans had a human brain, that brain could break, get confused, become afraid, collapse, or show things that were not really there. A person could feel endless sadness and lose the will to live. A person could fill with wild energy and stay awake for days. A person could hear voices. A person could see faces in the shadows. A person could believe that spirits were speaking to them through the wind. And in a small, ancient tribe, this was not a private problem. Everyone saw it. Everyone heard it. Everyone had to react to it somehow. If a man refused to sleep, the group noticed. If a woman screamed at invisible figures, the group noticed. If a young hunter suddenly began speaking in strange, broken phrases, the group noticed. There was no separate room where you could hide. There was no city where you could disappear. There was no clinic you could quietly visit. Your mind was part of the survival of the entire group. So what did ancient people do? The simplest answer would be, they got rid of people like that. But that answer is too simple. We know that ancient people cared for those who could not survive alone. In one famous cave in Iraq, scientists found the bones of a man who lived tens of thousands of years ago. His body was badly damaged. He had injuries and illnesses that must have made life extremely difficult. He could not hunt like the others. He could not defend himself like a healthy adult. By the cold laws of nature, he should not have lived long, but he did live. That means someone helped him, someone shared food with him, someone protected him when he was weak, someone decided that his life still mattered. And this is important because it changes how we imagine our ancestors. They were not just cruel animals with spears. They did not think only about meat, fire, and survival. They had bonds. They had memory. They had loyalty. They had people they refused to abandon. And if they could care for a broken body, then an even darker question appears. What did they do with a broken mind? The answer was not the same everywhere. Some people were cared for, some were feared. Some were driven away. Some were seen as cursed, and some were seen as chosen. To understand this, you have to imagine what the ancient world looked like from inside their minds. They did not know what was happening in the brain. They did not know about brain chemistry, trauma, or illness. They had no brain scans. They had no names for different conditions. So, when someone heard a voice that no one else could hear, ancient people explained it through the only world they knew. Spirits, ancestors, gods, demons, curses, messages from the dead. A person who saw what others could not see might not have been considered crazy. They might have been seen as someone standing close to another world. A person who shook, cried, spoke strangely, or fell into a trance might not have been seen as simply broken. They might have been seen as someone touched by a powerful, invisible force. And this is where the shaman appears. Not always, not in every case, and not as beautifully as films sometimes show it, but in many ancient cultures there was a special person who seemed to stand between the ordinary world and the invisible world. The tribe believed that this person could speak with spirits, ask for healing, read signs, talk to ancestors, travel in dreams, understand strange visions. And here is what is surprising. Many things connected with shamans are very similar to what we would now call severe mental suffering. Hearing voices, seeing visions, falling out of ordinary reality, entering strange states, speaking with invisible beings. Today, signs like these could lead a person to a doctor, but in an ancient camp, the same signs could make people whisper, "The spirits have chosen him." This does not mean ancient life was gentle. This does not mean mentally ill people were always treated with respect, but it does mean their behavior was often given a place inside the shared story of the group. And that story could change everything. Because if the tribe believes your voices are messages, you are not just a burden. You have a role. If the tribe believes your visions come from the ancestors, you are not just frightening people. You may be useful. If the tribe believes your strange dreams warn of danger, they may protect you instead of throwing you out of the group. This is one of the strangest features of humans. We do not just feel pain, we explain it. And that explanation can decide whether a suffering person is treated like a monster or like someone who still belongs to the group. Imagine a small tribe by the fire. A young man has not slept for 2 nights. He keeps staring into the darkness. He says he hears his dead father calling him from the forest. One person in the group may be afraid of him. Another may decide he is dangerous. But an old woman may say, "Listen to him. The dead are speaking to him." And now everything changes. The young man is still suffering. He is still confused. He may still be terrified, but the group has built a bridge between his pain and their world. They have made his experience meaningful, and meaning can be very powerful. It can keep a person inside the circle instead of pushing him out into the darkness. But again, we should not make this story too beautiful. Ancient people could be cruel. Fear turns into violence very quickly. If someone behaved in a way the group could not understand, they could be tied up, locked away, driven out, starved, beaten, or forced through painful rituals. One of the oldest and strangest practices was making holes in the skull. This was done in many parts of the world. A person could have part of their skull cut or drilled away while they were still alive.
If you will watch it this far, please give it a like.
Why did they do this? Sometimes it may have been connected to head injuries. Sometimes it may have been a ritual. And in some cases, people may have believed they were letting evil spirits out of the head. Imagine how terrifying that is. A person behaves strangely. The tribe believes something inhuman is inside them. And instead of medicine, they take a stone tool. They open the skull. They try to release the darkness. It sounds horrific. But even here, there is something strange. Some skulls show signs of healing. That means the person survived. And if the person survived, it means someone cared for them afterward. Someone had to keep them alive through pain, blood, fever, and recovery. Even cruel treatment could include care. This is the strange pattern we see again and again in human history. Fear and compassion stand side by side. People hurt a suffering person because they are afraid, and then they feed that same person because they cannot fully stop caring. Ancient Egypt gives us another part of this story. The Egyptians had some of the earliest written ideas about mental suffering. They did not understand the mind the way we understand it today, but they tried to describe deep sadness, confusion, fear, and strange inner pain. They often mixed treatment of the body with spiritual treatment. A person could be given herbs, prayers could be spoken over them, a priest could sit beside them. Words, ritual, touch, and belief were all part of healing. To us, this may sound primitive, but think about this. The person was not always simply thrown outside the settlement. They were seen, they were treated, someone tried to help. In ancient Greece, this story became even more interesting. Some Greek thinkers began saying something very bold for their time. They said that madness did not always come from gods or demons. They said it could come from the body, from the brain. This was a huge step, Because if madness comes from demons, you fight the demon. But if madness comes from the body, you care for the person. You give them rest, food, routine, calm, sleep, a safer life. Today, this idea sounds normal, but in the ancient world, it was almost revolutionary. But the Greeks still loved the idea of sacred madness. They believed some strange states of mind could come from the gods. A person who spoke in riddles, shook, entered a trance, or gave strange warnings could be seen as a messenger. Powerful people traveled far to hear the words of oracles. Kings and generals wanted advice from people who seemed to speak from a world beyond ordinary reality. And again, the same strange pattern appears. One person's madness could be another person's sacred gift. Rome had its own version of this problem. The Romans were practical people. They loved order, law, rules, and control. So when a person could not control their own life, Roman society often tried to place them under the control of another person. This could protect them, but it could also take away their freedom. And we still struggle with this problem today. If a person's mind is unstable, how much freedom should they keep? When does protection become control? When does care become a cage? This question is not modern. Ancient people were already facing it. Then, much later, in the Middle Ages, the story became darker in many places. Mental illness was more and more often explained through religion and fear. People believed demons could enter the body. They believed strange behavior could be possession. They believed suffering was a battle between good and evil inside a person. So the treatment often became the driving out of spirits, prayers, fasting, isolation, pain. People were sometimes locked away, beaten, or starved because others believed this would make the evil come out. For many suffering people, this must have been a nightmare. They were already trapped inside a mind they could not control. And then the people around them made that pain even worse. But even in this dark period, the story is not only about cruelty. Some religious communities accepted people like this. Monasteries and early hospitals sometimes gave mentally ill people food, shelter, and order. They did not always understand what was happening. Their explanations were often wrong. But some still believed that a person needed to be cared for, and this matters. Because again and again, for thousands of years, humans returned to the same inner struggle. One part of us fears what it does not understand. Another part refuses to abandon a suffering person. In the Islamic world, attitudes toward mental illness took another important step. In some cities, special hospitals were created where people with troubled minds could be cared for. Doctors wrote about different kinds of mental suffering. They tried to describe symptoms. They used music, baths, rest, conversation, and medicine. It was not perfect, but compared with many other places of that time, it was much more humane. The idea was simple but powerful. A person with a broken mind is still sick, and sick people need care. Not mockery, not torture, not chains, care. Later, special institutions for mentally ill people also appeared in Europe, but many of them turned into terrible places. One of the most famous was Bethlehem Hospital in London, which later became known as Bedlam. That name became connected with chaos and madness, and for a long time people could even come to such places just to look at the patients. Imagine that. Your mind is falling apart. You are scared, confused, maybe hearing voices, maybe not understanding where you are, and strangers come to look at you like an animal. For entertainment. This is one of the most disgusting things people did to those who were suffering. But over time, reformers began to fight against it. They said that mentally ill people were not monsters, not jokes, not cursed objects, not animals. They were people. They needed kindness, safety, and dignity. And in a strange way, these reformers were not inventing compassion. They were returning to something much older, older than hospitals, older than books, older than cities, to the same thing that once helped a badly injured man survive in an ancient cave, to the same thing that made a tribe feed someone who could not hunt, to the same thing that made people sit beside a suffering person instead of letting them disappear, to the decision to stay. Maybe that is the real story. Ancient people did not have one simple answer to mental illness. Sometimes they cared, sometimes they feared, sometimes they worshipped, sometimes they punished, sometimes they tried to heal, sometimes they only made things worse. But they could almost never simply ignore it, because in a small group, no one could fully disappear. A person whose mind was different from the others forced the whole group to answer a question. Are you still one of us? Do you still matter? Should we protect you? Should we fear you? Should we listen to you? Should we lock you away? The history of humanity is the history of how we answered this question again and again in different ways. And maybe the most surprising thing is this. The oldest traces show not only cruelty, they show care. Long before modern medicine, long before anyone understood how the brain works, people were already doing something deeply human. They kept the weak alive. They gave meaning to a strange mind. They built stories around suffering. Sometimes those stories helped. Sometimes they caused harm. But behind all of it stood one uncomfortable truth. A group survives not only because its strongest members are strong. A group survives because it decides who is worth saving. And thousands of years ago, by fires, in caves, under cold stars, our ancestors were already making that choice. They looked at people who could not survive alone, at people with broken bodies, at people with wounded minds, at people who frightened them, at people they did not understand. And sometimes, instead of leaving them behind, they stayed beside them. That is what ancient people did with the mentally ill. They feared them, explained them, turned them into shamans, prophets, cursed people, patients, prisoners, and sacred messengers. But again and again, they cared for them.
Now's the time to subscribe to the channel